Hello everyone, I'm Nika Underwood from TAFU, a teen nature conservation organization promoting personal responsibility towards nature and wildlife. Thank you all for joining us again for a special and very exciting interview with Martin Bailey, a professional and award-winning famous photographer with some breathtaking photos. Martin has dedicated his career to sharing the wonders of our planet with photographers around the world through his artistic vision. We are here this evening or morning, whatever it is for you, to hear his journey, the challenges he faces in his journey, and the impact that one photographer can have. Martin is a nature and wildlife photographer based in Turkey. He's pioneering podcast and blogger, ex-Ride Colorati member, software developer, and educator. Fueled by his passion for nature and travel, and a tireless desire to share his knowledge and artistic vision, Martin is a popular international tour and workshop leader, helping photographers from around the world to experience and capture the wonders of this awesome planet that we call home. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about what I talked about and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a professional photographer, and as you said, an international workshop leader. I've just finished two. Let me just turn my mail off. I've just finished three tours here in Japan. The Japan tours have been like the center pole of my business. I've My business was incorporated in 2010. So you'd have been 2 years old, yeah, at the time. It's the podcast. I started to do a lot of that from the podcast, which is actually that started in 2005, so 18 years ago now. So I've been doing things like that, my podcast is audio with images embedded, and I do the blog and everything. So because it's been running for so long now, a lot of the technology when I first started was very, very immature, and I had to build a lot of it myself. But I've got a technical background and a business background, and so all of the things that I've been doing over the years until that point helped me to run my business and maintain everything and do all of my own accounts and all of the boring stuff that we have to do with businesses. So I wear many hats. That's why I have my hair short so it doesn't get mussed up. But yeah, it's been a great career so far, and getting to meet people like you as well. And you seem to be doing a great job with with all of the things that you're doing. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you for coming and thank you. How did you get into wildlife photography in the first place?
Well, I've been photographing since I was a teenager, and I initially used to enjoy just mainly landscapes. And when I moved to Japan when I was 24, which was forever ago now, I bought myself an SLR camera, and I started to get into photography more. And at one point, it was probably around 2002, 2003, I got myself a slightly long lens. It was an old 100 to 300 lens, and I pointed it at a bird in a tree, and the I noticed that you could see the sun shining through its nostrils from the other side. And it just being able to see that amount of detail in a relatively small bird was completely awesome. And I thought, okay, so maybe this is something I want to explore more. And I took my first summertime visit to Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan, in the autumn or late summer of 2003. And for that, I bought a better long lens. And it was, it really went from there. I started photographing deer in the Kushiro Marsh, the wetlands there, and the the red crowned cranes, which are a big part of my winter work now. They're huge birds. They stand about the same height as my wife, which is about 158 centimeters, I think it is. And because their eyes are on the top of they're almost at the top of their head, they would actually be looking down, well, probably directly at my eyes rather than my wife looks up to me a little bit, but Yeah, so the birds have been amazing, but I also changed my I added a number of tours over the years. So I've done Greenland, Iceland, Antarctica, and Namibia as well in Africa is a place that's very close to my heart, and I still go there at least once a year at the moment as well.
Oh wow. What would you consider to be your biggest achievement in your photography career?
There's small things. I remember the first time, I mean, I don't do competitions as such. I've done exhibitions of my work and various things like that, and I've re received praise and awards for various things. But I have, I remember the first time that I really felt that I'd done a good job of building the job that I do and the company that I did. I was on a tour with a lady. There was, a normal tour group, but one of the participants or guests was from Israel, and
Oh,
she'd been a little bit down. She's getting on a little bit, and although she was enjoying the photography, you could see that she was tired and she wasn't so much enjoying it as much as I would have liked her to. And then on the third morning in Hokkaido, we were scheduled to go somewhere else, and this lady, um, it started to snow, and I thought we're going to go back to the cranes because we'd not had any snow, any falling snow with the cranes for the first 2 days. So I took the group back, and this lady who'd been all down until that point was jumping up and down and giggling like a teenager. And to me, I realized at that point that was really one of the best parts of my job till then. And that was maybe, wait, it must be maybe coming on to 10 years ago now, but I'd been incorporated my business and had been working for around 5 to 8 years, and it would to me that was like a miracle, a miraculous moment. I felt as though everything was coming together, and it was more because I was able to, not directly through my photography, but through the business I'd built around photography, I was able to change lives. And I've got a lot of those moments where what I do helps to bring happiness to others. And I think happiness is something that, we could all do with a little bit more of. So
yeah.
yeah, that was one of my best moments, I think.
It sounds lovely. Can
Mm.
you maybe discuss some of the challenges you faced in your work as a photographer?
Yeah, well, as a photographer, the biggest challenge for most photographers is making a living. Because the value of photography has dropped. I I used to make enough just from stock sales, through a stock agency. I used to make enough to at least pay the rent, not make a living. That was maybe 10 years earlier still. I know a lot of stock photographers that were in it well before I got into photography as a profession, and they were making all of their living and a good living from stock photography. That was already gone when I started my business in 2010, but still, for a number of years, making at least enough to pay my rent was possible through that, and I was paying, making more of a living through other things. But even that now is going away. Not a lot of stock sales because of the way the market changed. And this is not necessarily for good or bad, but people now, it's a lot easier now to make good photographs. And so with the ease that it is to make photographs, people are giving them away more readily. And if you can get a decent photograph for free, then there's not a lot of reason for companies to get a budget to buy them. So monetizing a a business as a photographer is becoming much more challenging. But I built my business the way I did with the tours because people are always going to want to travel and make beautiful photographs in beautiful locations. So that is really the main source of income for my company now. But of course, the other challenge was that having all of your eggs in one basket, as they say, the stocks sales were dropping, and print sales, for example, I'm not selling as many prints as I used to, and so I became basically a business with one revenue stream almost. So when the pandemic hit and nobody could travel, it was like, okay, so now we're 90%, 97% drop in income. And that hit me really hard. So, being able to get back out last summer to Namibia and for my 3 12-day tours in January and February that we've just finished last week, no, this week. Um, that was great. Is at least we can start to see some money in the bank coming into the bank again. And so just really keeping a roof over our shoulders is no, that's where I'm getting it right. A roof over our head has been probably the biggest challenge, especially with the pandemic.
How did you then like work around the business of it all during the pandemic?
Well, I did a number of things. I developed software. I enjoy developing software. Everything that I've done in my business, I do because I enjoy it. So the tours, I don't take anyone anywhere just for money. I do it because I want to spend time in those locations with people. But I enjoy developing software. So I've got a couple of iOS apps, and I have a Photoshop plugin that sell relatively well, and so they do bring in a bit of income. Um, but I really have to develop those revenue streams further because, as I just mentioned, if the tours go away again, it probably won't be the last pandemic, although we hopefully will handle it better than this one. But I think that there's a lot of risk in having most of my income coming from one stream. So I'm going to try and develop more software and more other ways to make a living in addition to the tours.
Mm.
And at that as well will lead at some point to probably more of I don't know, a risk-free business. But luckily, the other thing is I did have a bit of savings. So for the second and maybe all coming into the third year of the pandemic, I was living on savings mostly. So it was just lucky that I had that to fall back on.
Yeah, maybe slightly happier now it's done that. What would
Absolutely.
you say is the role of photography in raising awareness or about the challenges maybe that nature faces or also just
Mm,
nature conservation in general?
I think the being able to share photographs along with facts about what we're photographing is important. And I
Mm.
remember sharing when I came back from Greenland in 2016, which was what, 7 years ago now. Um, we had hired a helicopter and we flew over one of the main glaciers from out that was admissible from our where we were staying. And I had looked on Google Earth, and the images on Google Earth were about 7 or 8 early years earlier than when we went. And we arrived there, and as we were flying over, we were looking at a fjord and not a glacier, which is I was expecting to see. And it turns out that the field that we were looking at, it went back and round and 40 kilometers further than I expected it to. So essentially, what had happened was the glacier was 40 kilometers had receded 40 kilometers back, melted, due to global warming. And we got up onto the main table that is covers all of Greenland, and we saw all of the ice there, and that's comforting because there's a lot of ice there. But when you think that all of the fields or all of the glaciers that went down into the fields around Greenland are all just over the course of some 8 or 9 years, 40 or so kilometers further back, it makes you realize that there's a lot of things going wrong with the planet at the moment. And it's basically, I mean, it's up to us to fix it. And there are way too many people out there in powerful positions that are making jokes about it or not putting the policies in place to protect the planet. And we're gonna be not going to be handing your generation a very good planet if we don't make changes soon. So, it's being able to show photographs and then, like I say, the facts that that was actually, such a big recedence in the glacier, I think can be a very powerful message. But again, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can help. And I think just sharing photos, beautiful photos of a beautiful planet can make people want to protect it more. And so in many ways, photography on the whole, we're a very visual people. Of course, if you're fortunate enough to have sight, which not everyone does, but I think that even being able to tell the stories of the places that I've seen and the places that we see as photographers, because we're more we see more than people who don't photograph. We're looking much more actively for things to make beautiful photographs of. And so even the things that we don't photograph, we've looked and we've seen more than a lot of people do. So we're able to become more ambassadors for the planet, if you like.
Yeah, right. Very interesting. Um, well, what do you believe then the impact of one photographer could be in promoting environmental awareness as well as conservation efforts?
I think anybody has the power to make change, and the more you can spread the word. You've built a wonderful audience for your with your work. I've built an audience with mine, and we're able to reach people that we wouldn't be able to reach otherwise. And I think that that helps to raise awareness. But I think also it really depends how much we ourselves are in tune with what we're photographing.
Mm.
I've traveled with some people that I would unfortunately probably never want to travel with again because they're more concerned, especially with wildlife. Some people are more concerned with getting the photograph than the welfare of the animals. And I think that as photographers and as in my position as a tour leader, it's important to educate people as well. It's not just about snapping a few nice photographs. If we change the way the animals behave too much, I think it's always a fine line because many of the places that I visit, um, they are tasked, for example, with the hooper swans that we photograph in Hokkaido. The people that we visit are tasked with feeding the swans, because there's not a lot of natural food there. And so it's the swans normally would go a few 100 kilometers further south. But there's a place where there's a warm beach, there's geothermal activity that keeps the snow on the beach where we photograph from melted and a little strip of water. And so the swans stopped there when they flew down from Siberia, for a break, and somebody fed them there because they were there and they'd just flown a few 100 kilometers to get there. And it turns out that that helped to bring in tourism. So again, we get around to the ecotourism aspect. And some people don't think that it's right that we should feed animals. And in some ways I agree, but I also think that we've messed the planet up to the point where if we don't help to a degree, then some animals have nowhere to go now. If they go further south, there's no one feeding them there, so they have a harder time getting through the winter. And so it's very difficult. And if I could tag on another story there and a related story, we got to Elephant Island in Antarctica years ago when I was working as the one of the resident photographers on an expedition down there, and there were elephant seals elephant seal pups, and you say pups, these things already weigh about 80 kilograms, and they're pretty hefty animals, but they've only been on the planet for a few weeks. And because of global warming, they were falling through their dark fur with the sun hitting them makes them warm, and they were melting holes in the snow and falling through. So as the staff of the voyage, the expedition, the ship that we were working down there on, made a decision to help them we basically got some picks and shovels and we made a ramp so that the seals could get out of the holes. And there's always a moral dilemma there because we shouldn't always, get involved in it's natural that that happens, you could say, but it's not natural that the planet is warming up so much. And so the way that the elephant seals have been rearing their young for millennia should be a lot safer than it is now. So we figured it's probably our fault that they're falling through the snow, so let's help them.
Mm.
And that's something that I think is, as a responsible wildlife photographer and as naturalists and people that are working around animals, the decisions that you make have to be made carefully. But I
Mm.
think if you're a good person, you'll generally make good decisions.
Yeah. And would you how did the seals then react to that happening? But firstly, when you did it first
Well,
time, and also once it happened.
well, I I was in two minds as to whether or not to go on and say this, but it's actually quite sad. They reacted initially, they were not necessarily happy. They tried to bite the people because there was some people got down into the holds with them to try and pull them out and help them out. And seals can be quite, they're like bears in a way. They have very strong mouths, and so they tried to bite them, but we got into a position where they couldn't bite us and help them out, and they ran down the beach and seemed fine. But the sad part is that that was one of three expeditions,
Mm.
and we went back on the end of the third expedition and found a number of circles of dead pups. They'd fallen back through the holes, or maybe even gotten back in the same holes. And unfortunately, many of them had still died. So that it didn't feel very good.
Yeah. Did, could you showcase that sort of story with your work once you did that, or was it more just do it and focus on something else?
I we did talk about I made the a point of talking about that when I got back, and it helped to a degree to showcase the problems that we're causing. But at the end of the day, I mean, things happen, and we have to try and get back in the saddle, and we can't be too sad about things. I think it's more about continuing to try and improve the planet and improve people's awareness to hope that we can change things. I don't know if we're too far gone. We may be, because the world does go through cycles, and we may be heading into a warmer phase anyway, but
Mm.
we're definitely not helping it with what we are doing. I I noticed over the last maybe 7 or 8 years, there
Mm.
was less snow in Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan, where I've just been with my tours. And it was getting, less snow each year. And then when the pandemic hit, and I mean, if you think about it, there was way less planes in the air. They were burning less fossil fuels. There was people were working remotely. So again, less gasoline burned. Um, we probably helped the planet more than we realized by not traveling as much as we did or as much as we do.
Mm.
And for the last few years, we've had a lot of snow again, and it was almost immediate. So we probably could, if we were to make a few decisions as a race, that we could probably turn a lot of it around. The problem is that people have become so used to being able to jump on a plane and go anywhere they want. Um, I strongly believe that we should limit the amount of pleasure travel people can do. And that's a crazy thing to say because I make part of my living from people traveling. But I think that we either need to do that or we need to develop planes that can move around. I mean, solar powered planes, it might take a little bit longer, but if you make great big giant solar powered, solar paneled wings, you never know. We could get off up into the air and just sail around on big solar powered planes. If we can do things like that, traveling can become more sustainable. But at the moment, it takes so much fuel to get those big Airbuses into the air. And every time we do that, we're hurting the planet. So, it's probably the areas like that have to have big changes made um, until we can get in a situation where we can travel more easily without burning fossil fuel.
Yeah, definitely. I was also actually thinking about that a few years ago about the solar powered plane,
Mm,
wondering if it's actually possible. I wonder.
mm.
But yeah. Maybe on a more technical note, like how do you collaborate with like conservationists, biologists, and scientists to like make sure that your work reflects the challenges that wildlife is facing, but also collaborate with them to find the wildlife you're actually looking for?
Well, with the Antarctica expeditions, those people are on board, and so we've got access to them all the time. In most of my trips, we rely heavily on the local guides. Um, Here in Japan, I'm the expert for our groups. I'm not I hire people to do all of the logistics, the hotel side and things, but as far as the wildlife is concerned, I'm the man on these trips, and I will, like for example, I travel with a projector and a screen, and at some point on all of the trips, I will relay a lot of information to our guests. But if we're in, say, in Africa, in Namibia, where that's my next trip in April and May this year. I've got 2 3 week trips out there. Um, Over there, we work with professional guides who they know all of every species of animal that we might see. They know the conservation aspects of it, which are endangered, which are not, and again, really just help to directly raise awareness within the group, and then we take that back and share it with friends. Um, but it's a lot of that kind of trip, although what we do helps, they're really just for in many ways they're just to get good photos. But you can't photograph, say, for example, a black or a white rhino without appreciating things like the fact that it's still got its horn, because the trade for rhino horns has been so ferocious over the last so many years. But they're finally now getting part of it under control. And so poachers are not getting in there. The first two few years that I was working in Namibia, we were actually photographing rhinos that had no horn because they were removing them so that somebody wouldn't kill the rhino to get their horn. I mean, again, it's just so sad to me that someone could think that you could take a life, any life, to just to take a part of that animal. Um, but there's unfortunately, there's a market for it. And until people realize that things like that just are not acceptable, it's something that we will always have to fight. But it is nice to be able to photograph these animals with their horns because it shows that to a degree we're winning. We're helping. And you come back and share photographs of rhinos. They're such a beautiful animal. Um, Being able to, at least the other part of it, of course, is because it is a kind of ecotourism, our the money that we take into those areas helps to protect the animals. If it wasn't for the people visiting, there'd be no money to protect them. So it is helping, even though it's indirect, because a lot of the time, like I say, the direct goal of our visits is to make beautiful photos.
Yeah. Horrible and nice.
Yeah, yeah.
In your opinion, what can individuals and communities do to support conservation efforts and photographers as well?
Well, I think photographers, to a degree, I mean, there are photographers in the world that are hired to go and document, and various animals. People like Paul Nicklin, for example, spring to mind. And people like Paul they're hired, they're obviously paid money to go and do that kind of work. So that supports the photographer. But the work that he brings back from his trips is vitally important. He's basically put into places to pinpoint, certain species, and he comes away with work that is so, I want to say emotive, but it's beautiful work. And so, that is a way that photographers can be helped. Anytime you pay a photographer to do anything, it's helping to keep them in a job. But it also, if done right, can really help the world around us by showcasing the beautiful wildlife and often the ecosystems that we are trying to protect.
Yeah. And would you say that going how to say would you say that, like, can an individual do and communities change something in just a small part, that obviously with helping photographers in that way, but more of in a daily life sort of thing? Would it be possible, do you think, to help nature in smaller ways?
I think anybody that takes or makes a photo of a beautiful animal, and beauty is very subjective. I mean, you can photograph some of the ugliest things on the planet, and there's pretty much, I don't really believe there are many things that are truly ugly. We everything that's alive we can appreciate.
Mhm.
But I think that, photographing anything and sharing that work will help to raise awareness. And the more we appreciate what we've got here on this planet, the more we'll hopefully want to protect it. It's even just on a daily, we here in Japan, unfortunately, we still use a lot of plastics. And we've seen that the ocean plastic is the microplastic is causing major problems for marine wildlife.
Yeah.
And we we still here on not cutting back enough. Many countries now are, you can't get plastic things, you can't get a plastic bag. Um, and that's great. But because of my appreciation for the planet, my wife and I, even though we live in a society where plastics are readily available and too readily available, we always take our own bag to the shops.
Mm.
And when even though we can pay like 1 yen, I've heard that some countries in Europe now are talking about a plastic bag will cost you €1. That's about 150, 160 times percent, not percent, times more than we have to pay for a bag here.
Mm.
But it's not the money, it's more about wanting to cut back on plastic. Um, when I'm traveling, we unfortunately end up having to buy drinks in plastic bottles because that's how it's made available. But
Mm.
at home, I always take a flask. I fill it with water myself,
Mm.
and I don't use plastic bottles in my regular daily life. And that all comes from an appreciation of what we've got that probably comes from my photography.
Yeah. What message would you give to aspiring photographers and conservationists who are passionate, about making a positive difference?
Mm. I think that the main thing, and this is more just for how to make beautiful photographs, is to photograph what you love. And you said you used the word passionate there. I think being passionate about any particular subject will help you to make better photographs. And so, photograph what you love and try to photograph it as often as you can. And that will drive you to do more of that kind of photography. But also, your passion for the subject comes across in the images. Um, if it doesn't come across in the images, then you need to start to think of how you could make it come across in the images more. There are always things that we can do. Um, Sometimes I photograph cranes in their environment, or any of the animals. I'll photograph them in their environment, so you can see more of them as a part of a landscape, and that can help people to have a better appreciation for that. But I think, yeah, that you really have to follow your heart and photograph the things that you love. Try to make it look as beautiful as possible, and then that will hopefully help others to appreciate it as well.
Yeah. Are there any specific techniques you use to sort of show your passion in your photos, or?
Um, I I really enjoy making portraits of subjects, and I'm lucky enough to work with some animals that have just such amazing expressions. And one of them I'm thinking of is the snow monkey, which it's a Japanese macaque, but they live in the snow, and it's the ones you've probably seen on National Geographic TV and stuff, where they sit in the hot water pool, the
Mm.
hot spring. Um, but one photograph that I shot there recently, I don't know if this will work, but I will see if I can show you the photograph. Um,
That'll be cool.
I should have it in Apple Photos. So if I can just, here
I
we
don't
go. So let me share my screen for a moment, and it should record for you.
know.
Um, let's see. You may have to. Where's the share screen? Um,
Bottom green button, it should be anyway.
Here we go. That's
I don't know what it is, but for me, monkeys are very cute in every way.
yeah. Well, so can you see this
Yeah,
photo on the screen?
yeah.
So here, see, what I've done is I've tried to show the human relationship. The way it's got its hands, it's actually got that's a foot and a hand. But it's almost as though they're deep in thought. And I got two shots, one with the monkey's eyes open, but it's looking upwards, and that's very symbolic to humans. It shows that it's deep in thought. And then the one where the eyes are closed, again, it's a way of showing emotion and thought and consciousness that I think helps people to understand that these animals are so close to humans. But that's one way. Here's another, like getting a mother with a baby. And these again are going to help people to realize that we've got something here that needs to be protected, but it's not necessarily. I mean, if we look here, this is a red-crowned crane. Um, these are all photographs that are very intimate,
Mm.
and I think that to show an animal in such an intimate way is one of my techniques for, to help relay or to help get people emotionally invested in my work and in the species that I'm photographing. Um, just to add on one thing here as well, the red-crowned cranes, there was only 33 red-crowned cranes in Japan after the First World War, and now there's almost 3,000 of them. And the reason for that, and there's still only, I mean, it's still only 3,000. That's not very many for a species. But they were able to bring them back from very small numbers because of the kindness of people who gave up land for them to feed them on again. So they throw out corn, and that has given them enough food and energy to get through the winters, and then they've gradually grown back in numbers. So again, when we talk about whether it's right or wrong to feed animals,
Mhm.
it's we've messed it up for them. We were the reason there was only 33 of them after the war. It's our responsibility to bring them back. And this is a success story to a degree, but it comes down partly to the fact that we've been feeding them. So I I think that some people talk about whether or not feeding is a good thing. I think when you make the decision properly and responsibly, it can be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I
So,
feel what you mean with your images though, like in those that you've shown, I feel like I don't know if they're the true emotions that the animal is feeling, but they definitely
mm,
make us think that they're feeling those emotions.
that's a very, very good point. And this is something that I often talk about in that, you know, we are personifying, or we're making that animal into a person. um and that is why a lot of the time I wait for that specific moment, because I want to help people to make that connection. And you're right, I mean, it's kind of a spoiler, but a lot of the time the monkeys, when they're holding the young like that, it looks like affection, and I know that to a degree there's affection there, but sometimes it's just a hot water bottle, and they're just trying to keep warm. And you can see by the way they rock, they're cold, and they're trying to keep warm by huddling the baby into them. So you're absolutely right in what you say. It's not always a real human-like emotion, but we read into it what we will.
Yeah. Could you maybe walk us through like a typical day out in the field and maybe like from preparation all the way to post-processing? If you do that in a day, that is.
Yeah, I actually, because most of my photography is done while I'm touring with guests. For me, the planning has happened. Where we're going to go has happened well before I arrive there. And what we'll do is we go out. I will take the guests to a place where I know the weather conditions are going to help us to get something specific for those conditions, and I change where we go based on that. But a lot of the time, they're relatively set places. Like for the sea eagles that we photograph, for example, we have to go out on a boat, and that means that we need to have booked on a boat, and we get a specific time to go to the harbor to get on that boat, and we'll have 2 hours out at sea where we'll be photographing the eagles. But then I'll come back and I'll have maybe 1,700 photos of eagles. Um, it's more now. I'm using the Canon EOS R5, which is a 20 frames per second camera, compared to my old 5 DSR, which I maybe got 2 frames per second. So there's more frames to look through now. But
Mhm.
I use Capture One Pro to process my images, and Capture One Pro is a very powerful processing application, and it has you can copy and paste your settings from image to image. So if I make a few adjustments, I can copy those adjustments to the clipboard, and then as I look at future similar images, I can paste them, and that enables me to get through my processing very quickly. And like because I do it a lot as well. A lot of my guests on my tours, I get to dinner. I've maybe had an hour and a half in the room before dinner, and I'll say that's it, 1,700 photos processed and all selected, and they're like, "Oh, I'm still transferring them." So And a lot of the time, it's just because I'm fortunate enough to have a very fast computer. You know,
Mm,
if you, it costs a lot of money, but as you're able to get better equipment, then it can make it easier to process large numbers of images fast, very quickly. But if I can get to dinner or shortly after dinner to a point where all of my images from that day are processed, then when I get home, I can get into, I mean, I've got to do accounting this afternoon. So you have to make time to do other work.
mm,
But yeah, that's generally what I do. And I don't do a lot to my images. While I'm post-processing, I may increase the clarity a little. Um, because I always expose for the snow because it's white and it needs to be on the right side of the histogram. I shoot using a technique called expose to the right, or ETTR, and that helps me to get good quality images and very little grain. Because even though I'm using high ISOs, the high ISO puts the data on the right side of the histogram, and there's no grain on the right side of the histogram. That's all on the left side. So I might do a few tweaks to bring out the clarity. I might also, with snow monkeys, the monkeys can look a little bit dark. And because I don't want to overexpose the snow, the monkeys may go dark, and then the shadow slider will bring that out a little bit more. But they're the main tweaks that I do. I don't do a lot of work to the images.
mm. How many of that 1,000 images that you get per day do you actually end up using?
So my goal is usually to and use and show as few photos as possible,
Mm,
because I want it to be the best, the cream of the crop. So out of 1,700 images, I may end up with 20 or 30. It might be as high as 40 or 50, but it's rarely it's rarely more than that. And part of the reason is because we're shooting in bursts to get a good photograph where, say, for example, the eagles have their talons out ready to catch the fish. Um, but the one after that, the eagle is going to look like it's just standing up in the water. And then a frame or two later, it's going to be the fish is coming out of the water and there's a big splash following the talons. That's another nice frame. But the couple in the middle are not really worth anything. But you don't stop. You have to just shoot a burst. And so we know that we're throwing away at least 80% of the images in that burst. But even then, not every shot, every burst results in a photo that you want to use. Sometimes the bird drops the fish, sometimes it doesn't go quite as well as you'd hope. But sometimes your focusing runs off. You know, when you're focusing on an animal that is over sparkly water, a lot of the time the water can steal the focus from your camera. They're getting much better now, but occasionally your focus does go off as well. So technical errors can reduce the overall number of successes.
yeah. How much would you say that, I know you mentioned that having good technology can help efficiency, but
Hmm.
how much of a part would you say that it plays with actually having good photos?
The photo is really in the field, the photo is helped by technology to a degree, but I think also it we need to hone our skills to be we're the brains behind it. I mentioned exposing to the right. Cameras haven't changed. The metering systems on cameras hasn't changed for 170, 80 years since they were invented. Um, they're still trying to get all of the information in the middle of what's now a histogram. Um, we have to take control and move that to the right. I shoot in manual mode 98% of the time. Um, so I decide the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed. But I mean, that is one thing. The other thing is we do have to hone our skills, and I'm thinking back to when I started working with the 5DSR. I wanted the high resolution 50 megapixel camera, but it was such a slow camera. It wasn't in no means a sports or wildlife camera, but I was able to teach myself to not rely on the burst. And if I started to do a burst, it would chug along so slowly that I would never get the optimal moment when, say, for example, an eagle has its talons out. And so I had to train myself to release the shutter when I saw the talons go out. And so that made me a better photographer. So honing your skills and becoming better at executing the photograph is up to us. But now with 20 frames per second again, and the autofocus on the R5 is better than it ever was. You know, we used to have cameras where we had like 7 focus points in the middle of the frame. Now the whole frame is just thousands of focus points. And so those things are helping to make photography easier for us. But also it's helping a good photographer to get even better results. So you've got to make yourself the good photographer to really maximize on what the technology is giving us.
Yeah. Last question. Can you talk about your experience working with endangered species and maybe like the ethical considerations that come with that?
Well, we've touched on that to a degree already, but I mean, endangered the rhinos in Namibia, and the red crown crane here in Japan. These are both still considered endangered. The I think the experience is pretty much what we've already talked about, in that I think it's important to photograph animals and be aware that they are endangered, and we have to be responsible. You know, you can't change how these animals behave too much when you're around them, because a lot of these animals are used to having people near them. We don't have to be overly cautious, but you definitely need to raise awareness and help people to understand that doing things like I mentioned earlier, um, the killing a rhino to get its horn is never acceptable. Um, a number of years ago, when I got back, for example, I mean, I do the podcast, and that reaches many thousands of people each week. Um, I helped people to find out, to understand not only that there is a problem with the rhinos, but I introduced them to a charity that was, the Save the Rhino charity, that was helping to raise money. And so people will have hopefully seen my photos and heard me talking about them and the necessity to help. And that will have helped people to put their hands into their wallets, or, into their credit card details, and just pay a little to help to preserve that beautiful animal. And that came really, the reason for that was because I came back with some great photos of a beautiful animal that needs help.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Martin, for sharing with us your stories and giving us a little insight into the life of a photographer and the many possibilities that come with it. I hope
Not
that
at all.
I hope that your story will inspire the next generation of photographers. But sadly, that's all we have time for today, and I'm sure you all enjoyed listening to our amazing guest tonight, or today, altogether, really. Depends. Martin's tonight, I'm just morning, but yeah. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to follow Martin's work. You can find a link to his website below. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and don't forget to stay responsible, guys. Bye.
Bye.